The DJI Osmo Pocket 3 or a more conventional action camera? Which is the right choice for you? Well, let's try to figure it out. If you're considering purchasing the DJI Osmo Pocket 3, you're probably weighing it up against a more conventional camera, such as the Action 5 Pro, also from DJI, perhaps the Hero 13 from GoPro, or the Ace Pro 2 from Insta360. Well, today we're going to take a closer look at some of the features and capabilities of the Pocket 3, where it has an advantage over more conventional action cameras and the type of filming situations where these might be useful. And we'll also look at some of its disadvantages and limitations and situations where you might be better served with a more conventional action camera. So there's a lot to cover, so as usual I'll place the chapters up here and on the video timeline, but first this. Before we continue with today's video, a quick disclaimer: this video is not sponsored, paid for, or influenced in any way. I purchased all of the equipment with my own money and the opinions are entirely my own. Now, I do include links to the featured products as well as my recording equipment. These may appear throughout the video and in the video description. If you purchase using these links, I may make a commission and this is what helps fund the channel, but rest assured there is no price disadvantage to you. You are getting the best price I can find. Alternatively, if you want to support the channel, you could follow this link and buy me a coffee. And of course, if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more similar content. So back to the video. So let's start out with the features and capabilities where the Pocket 3 outperforms its action camera counterparts. And the first of these is the sensor size. Now, the Pocket 3 has a 1-inch sensor, and when you compare the action cameras, both the Action 5 Pro and Ace Pro 2 have a 1/1.3 inch sensor, and the GoPro has a 1/1.9 inch sensor. Now, these sensor sizes can be pretty confusing, but what it basically comes down to is that the Pocket 3 has a sensor which is 1.5 times the size of the sensor on the Action 5 Pro or Ace Pro 2, and over 3 times the size of the sensor on the GoPro Hero 13. So what are the benefits of having a bigger sensor? Well, put simply, it allows more light to hit the sensor for every frame of your recording. More light gives you a higher signal-to-noise ratio, or put very simply, more information about your picture, and increases the camera's dynamic range, which is its ability to show better detail in the brightest and darkest parts of the image. Now, if you're recording outside in bright daylight, you probably won't see much benefit from having the larger sensor. Where you'll really notice the difference is in low light situations. Now, when you hear low light situations, that typically conjures up images of nighttime city scenes with bright lights contrasting against dark shadows, and for those type of scenes, a bigger sensor will definitely be an advantage. But I think it's also worth pointing out that anytime you are filming indoors under artificial light, that's probably also a low light situation. For example, take a look at the scene I'm sitting in right now, comparing the Pocket 3 to the Hero 13. I think it's pretty clear that the Pocket 3 does a much better job. Check out the overexposure on my forehead on the Hero 13. And in the darker shadows, you can also see a very washed out image with lots of noise. Now, to be fair, the Hero 13 has the smallest sensor of this group and definitely the worst low light performance. The Ace Pro 2 and the Action 5 Pro both have much larger sensors, and they also have advanced processors which help them out in low light situations. But again, if we compare the Pocket 3 against the Ace Pro 2, which is widely recognized as the best performing low light action camera, here too you can see that the Pocket 3 is doing a much better job. Now, both of these clips were filmed using each camera's low light mode and with all settings set to fully automatic. Now, clearly you could adjust the settings on both cameras to further optimize this image, and I'm not going to say that the Pocket 3 will be better in all low light situations, but I think it's pretty clear from this example that having the bigger sensor gives you the best starting point. A single look at the Pocket 3 tells you that DJI have taken a very different approach with this camera when it comes to image stabilization and handling camera movement, opting for mechanical stabilization in contrast to the electronic image stabilization that you'll find in all action cameras. And these systems work in very different ways. Now, firstly, let me just state that all of the cameras we're looking at here have incredible stabilization systems, and in most cases you will get excellent results. But there are certain situations where electronic image stabilization will give you better results, and we'll talk more about those later on. But for now, we want to talk about where mechanical stabilization may give you an advantage. Now, without going into too much detail, let's just briefly look at how each of those systems work, starting with the Pocket 3. Now, the Pocket 3 has 3 motors which control the pan, the tilt, and the roll of the lens and sensor. And it uses built-in gyroscopes to sense any movement in the camera and compensate for them, keeping a stable image centered on the sensor. In contrast, electronic image stabilization crops in on the sensor and uses a combination of gyroscopes and analyzing the image itself in order to follow the image as it moves around on the sensor and remap it in order to give you a stable image. Now, that remapping does involve a little bit of image massaging. So although you're getting a beautifully stabilized image, in certain situations you may also see some digital artifacts in the background. Now, if you're filming against a backdrop of a clear blue sky or a snow-covered mountain, you're very unlikely to notice those. But if you have a complex background, such as a dense forest, that's when you will start to see digital artifacts. Here you can see a side-by-side example of the Pocket 3 versus the GoPro Hero 13 just walking through a forest. And if you pay attention to the trees or the forest floor, you can occasionally see those digital artifacts. Now, it's also worth mentioning that because electronic image stabilization relies heavily on the image itself, if you are filming in low light situations, stabilization may not be as effective, and also you are likely to see more and more severe digital artifacts. Now, the motorized gimbal head is not only good when it comes to stabilization, but it can also help smoothen out all kinds of camera motion. For example, notice as I turn the camera that the head lags a little bit behind in order to smoothen out that motion, which can help me to get much smoother transitions when I'm panning around in an image. This can also be very effective when used in combination with subject tracking, which we'll talk about next. Now, the motorized gimbal head is not only useful when it comes to stabilization or controlling camera movement, but it can also be used to track a subject. Whether you want to track a person as they move around in a scene, track your pet, your child, your vehicle, or another moving subject. And it's also worth mentioning that you can use the subject tracking feature in order to track a stationary subject while you are moving. This not only helps maintain your framing, but can also be very useful in providing additional stabilization. Also important to note that the subject does not have to be in the center of your frame. There are various tools available to place your subject in different parts of the frame to get the exact shot that you're looking for. Now, I should mention there is one action camera that also offers some degree of subject tracking. That is the Action 5 Pro, also from DJI, of course. But of course, your tracking is very limited to the direction that the camera is pointing in. It also requires cropping in on the image. And because these cameras have very wide-angle lenses, as the camera tracks your subject to the edge of the frame, you will also likely see some increased image distortion. So it really is no match for the tracking capabilities of the Pocket 3. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail on subject tracking. I made an entire video dedicated to this subject, so if you want a lot more details, go ahead and check that out on the channel also. The next advantage for the Pocket 3 is in the area of focusing. You see, all action cameras use a fixed focus mechanism in which everything beyond a certain distance, typically around 12 to 15 inches, is more or less in focus. In stark contrast, the Pocket 3 has an active autofocus mechanism, which allows you to focus specifically on your subject and you get a much crisper and clearer image. And while you don't quite get that blurry bokeh effect of bigger and more expensive lenses, the effect of having the subject sharply in focus and the rest of the image slightly out of focus helps to isolate the subject, which is a look that many people prefer. Another big advantage of the focusing mechanism is that it allows you to get even closer to your subject. The Pocket 3 can still focus at a distance of just over 4 inches, and if you use a macro lens you can get even closer. Check out this video for a lot more details on the focusing mechanism of the Pocket 3 and the use of macro lenses. The Pocket 3's autofocus system can be set to a continuous mode, or you can use single autofocus to lock in the focus at a specific point. The focusing mechanism on the Pocket 3 is probably one of the biggest differentiators between it and a typical action camera, so if you're doing unboxing or product showcase type videos, food videos, or any other video where you want to be up close showing detail, the Pocket 3 is clearly the better choice. The last advantage that I want to talk about is not so much a single feature or capability, but a combination of features that I think make the Pocket 3 the ideal vlogging and selfie camera. It begins with the gimbal head, which of course allows you to point the lens away from you or towards you, and all the time you have access to the screen in order to frame yourself in the image or access the menu, whatever the case may be. And you have the tracking capability, which when used in selfie mode allows you to place yourself exactly where you want in the frame, and the tracking mode will keep you there and also keep you perfectly stabilized. Add to that the focusing capability, which of course keeps you as the subject firmly in focus with the background slightly blurred. And finally, I just wanted to mention the microphone support for the Pocket 3. Not only do you have excellent onboard microphones, but the USB port on the Pocket 3 also allows you to plug in and use a variety of external microphones and wireless microphone systems. And then of course you also have the DJI Osmo Audio, which is basically a dedicated built-in wireless microphone receiver, allowing you to hook up 1 or 2 wireless mics directly for excellent audio results. Although on that final point, when it comes to the microphone support, I should add that the DJI Action 5 Pro also shares similar capabilities. So let's turn our attention to the areas where the Pocket 3 is at a disadvantage, and the first and probably most obvious of these is this is not an action camera. Between the gimbal head and the flip-out screen, this guy is pretty delicate. And if it were to get dropped, take a knock, if you were holding this or have this mounted to you and you were to take a fall, it would probably not end well for the Pocket 3. Even when it comes to stowing this between use, you have to take precautions. Of course, the flip screen is probably going to be in anyway, but with the gimbal head, you can't just thrust this into a pocket or throw it into a bag. You first have to secure this or place it in its protective case. On top of that, it's not waterproof or even weatherproof. I guess the gimbal head kind of prevents that. And because of that, if you look elsewhere, you can see things like this where they haven't even bothered to put a cover over the SD card. So clearly this is not the type of camera you want to be taking out in the rain, and you're going to have to take precautions in any kind of wet or dusty conditions. Earlier we talked about the difference in the stabilization types, mechanical stabilization on the Pocket 3 and electronic image stabilization on an action camera. And while both do an excellent job of stabilizing the image, I do feel that electronic image stabilization is going to give you better results where you have very violent or aggressive movement. Now, as we discussed in the last section, you probably wouldn't want to subject your Pocket 3 to that anyway, but even if you did, I don't think the results would be quite as good as when using electronic stabilization. Added to that, the roll function of the Pocket 3 does have a limitation of ± 45 degrees, whereas with electronically stabilized action cameras, you typically have a full 360-degree horizon lock. Earlier we talked about the focusing mechanism on the Pocket 3 being a major advantage, which it certainly can be, but it also can be a burden. It's something you have to think about when you power on the camera and start recording. Which focusing mode am I going to use and what will my camera be focusing on? Here are a couple of my recent examples where I got this completely wrong. In this first example, I was trying to film the scene of a plane landing and taxiing through the airport. Instead of fixing the focus on the distant objects, I left continuous autofocus enabled, and as you can see, it focused beautifully on the raindrops on the window instead of the scene I was trying to film. In this next example, I was doing some microphone testing, and by mistake I left it set to single autofocus. As long as I was close to the camera doing my setup, at least looking at the very small screen in bright sunlight, it looked just fine. But because I forgot to set continuous autofocus, as you can see when I move away from the camera, the results are not exactly what I was looking for. The next disadvantage of the Pocket 3 is a little bit surprising, and that is the lack of remote control options. Now, of course, it is possible to control the Pocket 3 using the DJI Mimo app, and with that you can do pretty much anything that the camera is capable of. But let's face it, it's not always practical or even possible to pull out a smartphone in order to control your camera. And there is one key feature which is missing, and that is the ability to power the camera on and off. When it comes to the action cameras, all three of them, including the DJI Action 5 Pro, have dedicated remote control options. Simple, go-anywhere devices that allow you to start and stop recording, change modes, even power on and off the camera. Some also offer GPS connectivity and other features as well. Yet for some reason this feature is yet to be available on the Pocket 3. And what's more, the Pocket 3 doesn't even support things like voice control or gesture control, which is something that is now commonplace on every action camera. And the final disadvantage when it comes to the Pocket 3 is, of course, the price. Now, here in the US in particular, we've seen significant price increases on the Pocket 3 over the last couple of months, going from just over $500 to now $800, which makes it about double the price of any action camera. Now, at its original price here in the US, and I think that same price is still valid in most countries, it's around 20 to 25% more expensive than one of the action cameras. And I think if you can really benefit from the features of the Pocket 3, that is certainly worth the upgraded price. But at double the price, it's a much more difficult decision, and those features really have to be indispensable. Trying to decide between the Osmo Pocket 3 and a more conventional action camera can be a pretty difficult decision. And chances are, no matter which one you choose, you're probably going to end up having to make some compromises. But hopefully this video has provided you with some useful information that will help make that decision a little bit easier. So that wraps it up for another video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please remember to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more similar content. If you have any questions, any comments, if you want to share your experience or make suggestions for future videos, please drop those into the comments section. Otherwise, thanks again for watching.